What an eventful weekend we've had. Welcome back to my F1 Diaries. Let's talk about the Mexican Grand Prix. First and foremost, sorry if I sound a bit off. I have a little cold, so we're just gonna have to deal with it together. And moving on to some stupid things that don't really matter, but I care about. Secret Santa has been drawn out, and I'm so excited. If you don't know, F1 holds a Secret Santa between the drivers every year. And at the end of the year, they post the video with everyone opening their gifts, and it's really funny, and it could be really wholesome as well and cute. So I'm just very excited about that. And next up, we obviously have special helmets and a special livery. Williams have a special livery with like a yellow engine cover, fluorescent yellow. It's to celebrate the return of an old sponsor and like a nod to an old livery they had. And I've got to say, I'm not a huge fan of this look for Williams. It just looks like, it reminds me of when they kept the fan in Alex's airbox. So not a fan. Somehow, like the old livery that they're referencing looks so much better. It just looks so much better. So I don't know, just old liveries are goated. Like we need to bring back that kind of design for liveries. But anyways, moving on to Fernando Alonso's helmet. Not a specific one for Mexico, but a specific one for his 400th Grand Prix, which is insane. This man has been racing for longer than I've been alive. Obviously not in a row, but still an incredible achievement. This helmet has like film reels of like his career, which look really good, and like the Alonso with like 400 and the A and the 2 O's he has in his name. Really cool design. I really like it. Congratulations, Fernando, for achieving something that no one has in F1. Next, of course, we have Checo's helmet. This is specific to Mexico because Mexico is his home Grand Prix. It's the wrestling mask that is iconic in Mexican culture, and I love it. I really, really do. It's simple. It's beautiful. The colors go well with everything, and with the Red Bull specifically. So very cool. Liked it a lot. Next, we have Carlos Sainz, which I think is more Day of the Dead themed with a skull up top. He also has a chili in the back for himself. And I just like the art style. It just looks like, I don't know how to describe it, but it just looks good. So yeah. Next is Charles Leclerc's. Honestly, it's not my favorite. It still looks good. I mean, I think everything he will do will look good, but I wanted to bring it up specifically because the way he revealed it, he was dressing up with his team and friends as a mariachi band, and it was really funny, and I just love to see him goofing around. It's one thing that I really, really love about him, that he doesn't take himself too seriously and he's not afraid to make a fool of himself. Not that dressing up as a mariachi band is making a fool of yourself, it's just a funny way to announce it and like doing everything extra. And last but not least, we have Franco, who, like the Williams, is referencing like retro designs, and I actually love it. It just looks really clean, and the colors match up perfectly with the yellow with the sponsor and the Argentinian flag and like the Williams blue. Everything just looks perfect. Love it. And that's it for that segment. I know it's not everyone's helmet, it's just the ones that I thought were worth bringing up. And moving on to the actual weekend. So the Mexico Grand Prix, the track itself, it's mostly slow speed corners and then very long straights and some curb riding. The one thing that is special about this track is its altitude. It is 2,226 meters above the sea level at its lowest point, which means there's physically less air. And that means a few things. Number one, there's less downforce generated because there's less air pressing down on the car. The teams will try to compensate for that with running high downforce setups. Number two, there's less drag because there's less air to punch a hole through, which theoretically means that the DRS is not that effective, because if there's not a lot of drag in the first place, there's not much reducing it. But because the teams run high downforce setups, the DRS is helpful, it is useful. And then one last thing that is kind of combining a few things is there's less cooling. This affects a few components in the car like the engine and brakes and a few others. That means that specifically for this weekend, teams have parts with a lot of cooling ducts. So that's what they do to try to deal with that. And without further ado, let's talk about practice. FP1 was full of rookies. Oliver Berman was in Ferrari instead of Charles. Felipe Dragovich was in an Aston Martin instead of Fernando. Kim Antonelli in a Mercedes instead of Hamilton. Robert Schwartzman in a Sauber instead of Zhou. And Pato Award in McLaren instead of Lando. Pato, of course, is also Mexican, so this is a home Grand Prix for him. Like, it is home, but it's not a Grand Prix weekend, so he was very loved by the audience. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's obviously a reason that McLaren let him do this specific FP1 session for them. The session itself was nothing really. We had 2 red flags, one for debris that came off of Max's car and one for contact between Alex and Ollie, which put both out of the session. Overall, I don't think it was very representative because all of the interruptions we had, also the fact that the track is not rubbered in, and also that major players were sitting out, like Charles and Lando and Lewis. But that also meant that the results were pretty exciting. It was one of the most diverse top 10 we've had in a while, so that was cool to see. FP2 was quite unique, to say the least. It was used for tire testing for Pirelli for 2025, which means that the session was 90 minutes. The first 60 for just testing, which means everyone is doing the exact same runs, each with the tires that Pirelli allocated to them. And then the extra 30 was for the drivers who sat out in FP1 to have normal practice runs. Those planes changed a little bit. The timings were not as clear because we had a red flag for George who spun out. But either way, again, not really representative, because although we know what everyone was doing, it's not comparable to anything that's going to happen in quali or the race. So pretty much a waste of time again. Except for one fun thing near the end. I was watching the F1 TV commentary this weekend, and as a reward for sticking through the whole thing, they did an analysis of James Hinchcliffe doing a routine with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders back in Austin, which was quite entertaining. So it wasn't all that bad. Some things that I did note throughout those 2 sessions, that Red Bull having some problem with their braking, and specifically Max having some troubles with his power unit. So not the smoothest sailing for them. Max also didn't manage to put in a time in FP2 at all. Like, each run he just had to pit because he was hearing strange noises from his power unit and whatnot. Also, Alex didn't put in a time because he had to have extensive work on his car after the accident he had in FP1. So he didn't even go out. He did not start the session. But then going to FP3, a much more normal session. No red flag, so everyone had their runs. And we ended up with a McLaren 1-2 with a relatively big margin to the rest of the pack. So I was cautious but optimistic about quali because, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The one thing I was quite worried about, except for McLaren bottling it, is Ferrari, which seemed strong throughout the whole weekend. And of course, Max, you can never really count him out. I guess that's just the usual. So in Q1, at the beginning, Ferrari, McLaren, and Mercedes were using the mediums, which, okay, that's interesting, I guess. All of them eventually put on softs. And for the first time this year, Oscar is out in Q1. He was actually on a really good lap, but he got over a curb, which means he got off track and his time was deleted, which didn't really matter because he lost so much time from going on the curb. But it hurt nonetheless. It hurt, obviously, for Oscar personally, but also for McLaren, because A, we need to keep extending our lead in the constructors, and B, having Oscar at the front with Lando will take points from Max as well in the Drivers' Championship. So bad all around. Of course, then obviously Checo as well, home hero, was out as well, which I obviously don't like him, and I'm glad that Red Bull aren't doing well, but you have to feel for him. It's his home Grand Prix. So many rumors about being replaced for next year, even though he has a contract. So yeah, feeling a little bad. And an intense Q1, which seems like it is always the case. Everyone is just so close. Even faster cars seem to struggle to get through. So literally no one is safe, which is definitely exciting, just not when it happens to your drivers. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. But moving on to Q2, honestly quite boring, which again seems like it's always been that way. Q1, very stressful. Q2, quite boring. And then Q3, once again, very stressful. But the one thing that was stressing me out is that Charles kept getting his times deleted. He did obviously put in a time and it got through at the end, but he was very close because Yuki right at the end crashed and we had a red flag that ended the session, which prevented obviously Yuki, but also Liam from improving. So both RBs are out in Q2. So Q3, stress levels coming up again. The first run for everyone, Lando didn't have a great lap. Max had his time deleted and the Ferraris were a 1-2. And then for the second runs, it didn't go quite as planned. Carlos stayed on top, did an even better lap than he did the first time, which by the way, both would have given him pole, and gets his first pole for the season. So great job for Carlos. Max somehow, of course, got to P2 and Lando just P3. Charles, not the best session, got P4, George P5, Hamilton P6, Kevin P7, Pierre P8, Alex P9, and Nico closing the top 10. So not the best quali session we've had at all. But as always, points are scored on Sunday. And historically, P3 is a great place to start the Mexican Grand Prix. I mean, there's such a long run into turn 1, longest on the calendar, in fact, that similarly to Austin, being on pole here could be a disadvantage. So I still had hope. And also, it's Lando we're talking about. He's determined. And also, the McLaren has supposedly good pace. So I was okay with that result. But moving on to the race, the start was fine for Lando. He was cautious and didn't lose any places, but Max did get in front of Carlos. Then we had contact between Alex and Yuki, which brought out the safety car and put both of them out of the race. We had a clean restart. Everyone kept their positions. And then a few laps later, Carlos overtakes Max beautifully. It was actually a really beautiful overtake into turn 1. And that overtake backed them up to Lando, who then attacks Max. They battle for a few corners, go off track, and once again, through goes Leclerc, and it's Austin all over again. I do have to say that Max was super aggressive this time. Lando basically had to avoid crashing him by going off to the grass and then off again in turn I think 8. But thankfully, the stewards had their eyes open, and Max got 2 10-second penalties. One for forcing Lando off and one for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. And we'll have a little penalty talk in a second. But he was still being an asshole, backing Lando up from the front, which I mean, like, fair game. It was just really annoying. He does finally box on lap 26, releasing Lando to clean air. And with his 20-second penalty, comes out in P15 out of 17 at this point, and climbs his way up to P6 where he stays and finishes the race. He did say later that the penalties were not his biggest problem this weekend, but the pace that they didn't have. So I do wonder if Lando could have just gotten him at some point on his own, which I believe he could, but we wouldn't know. We would never know. And now for a little bit of penalty talk. McLaren actually tried to appeal the Austin penalty for Lando, which I purposely didn't talk about last week because I don't know the rules that well, and I just don't want to say bullshit. But this is a recurring thing between the two, so I figured I'd just give my 2 cents on it. So the point that a lot of people were bringing up is that the stewards were not consistent with the penalties that they were giving. So other drivers in the same situation got the penalty for what Max was doing. So when Max is doing it, Lando is the one who gets the penalty. But that's actually not true. And I'm talking from a logical point because, again, I don't know what is up with who's in front at the apex. So maybe I am wrong, but basically it's whoever comes ahead that gets the penalty. So for example, George got a penalty for pushing Valtteri off. And in their case, George was the one who overtook Valtteri, unlike Lando and Max, where Lando was the one who overtook Max. And even more so, Pierre Gasly actually got a penalty for doing what Max was doing to, I think, Alex it was. Pierre was on the outside. Alex run him off the track, but Pierre overtook Alex and got the penalty, the same one that Lando got. So it's whoever comes first out of that corner, therefore gaining an advantage, who gets the penalty. So I think if Max was the one who came out of that corner ahead of Lando, he might have gotten a penalty. Obviously, we'll never know, but I think that's how it worked. The one point that I do think is very valid to argue with is that Max also went off track with Lando. They both went off track, and Max gained from going off track by defending that way. So in their case, I think they either should both get a penalty or not, because they cancel each other either way. But whatever, it's in the past. The FIA didn't approve of McLaren's petition, so nothing can be done to change that now. We can just learn from it and keep moving forward. And I don't want to say karma, but Max kind of got his karma with today's race, which, coming back to, I said that Max was up to P6. He was behind the 2 Mercedes, which were kind of having an isolated battle for maybe the last 30 laps, maybe even more. They were like 30 seconds behind the top three and then 10 seconds ahead of Max. So it was just the two of them fighting. They were very close. It was a good battle, respectful. Nothing happened, but it was really stressful at the time because I didn't know that nothing would happen. And if something would have happened, Max would just sweep right by and take fourth. So watching it live, it was very stressful, but after the fact, it was a great fight. At some point, there was some panic, at least in me, that rain was incoming, but thank God it didn't. I mean, obviously it could spice things up, but I didn't need anything to be spiced up. I could not handle it if it did. So we're in the closing stages of the race. Carlos is leading by, I think, 6 seconds from Charles, which was pretty much the gap that they had the whole time. And Lando in P3 was closing in on Charles. And at one point, Charles kind of gets caught in traffic, backing him into Lando, closing the gap into under 1 second. And on lap 62 out of 71, Charles goes wide in the last turn, and Lando goes to P2. Honestly, I think Lando would have made that move regardless, but also insane save from Charles. I am surprised he didn't just go into the wall, but great job. Then we had contact between Franco and Liam, who has to pit for a new front wing and also put softs in an attempt to steal the fastest lap point from Lando. But then Charles does the same, and also Checo does the same. Charles is the one who gets it on the last lap, and we have a Carlos win, Lando in second, Charles in third, which got us a great cool down room and a great podium. A Orlando podium, of course, a double Ferrari podium, Carlos and his car rising up on the platform to the podium, which I honestly think we should have that at every race. It's amazing. And of course, we once again got to hear the Italian national anthem. My favorite. I love it. We also had some very cute and funny and wholesome photo bombs from Carlos in the McLaren team photo and then Zach Brown in the Ferrari team photo, which was very sweet to see. So a great race overall. I do have to say about Carlos, he said in a press conference after qualifying that the success that he and Ferrari are having as of late is kind of bittersweet because he feels like they can go for the championships next year and he's not gonna be there, which was like a stab to the heart. Obviously, I'm not a huge Carlos fan, but I feel really bad for him, and I definitely prefer him over Hamilton, not only in Ferrari but in general. So good luck at Williams, I guess. Oh God. Some other people's races. Checo's race. He actually had a really good start. He got up to P13 or 12, I think, but it all kind of went downhill from there. He got a 5-second penalty for a false start because he started like beyond his grid box, and then he had contact with Liam that damaged his side pod and his overall performance throughout the whole race. He then had 3 pit stops and basically was running at the back for the whole thing. Obviously not the race you want to have at your home race, not the redemption from last year. And again, I don't like the guy. It's just sad to see. I'm an empath. I can't help it. Oscar's race, I just wanted to note, not that anything major happened, but it was a good recovery drive from P17 to P8. He was held up in the beginning for a while, which I think if that didn't happen, he could have gotten higher up in the grid, even ahead of Max, but obviously that didn't happen. I do want to note that he, unlike Lando, did not have any upgrades this weekend. His will come in Brazil, so we'll look out for that next week. And he had some, I don't know if funny is the word, but entertaining radio messages, to say the least. It's the first time I heard him being like this angry and stressed, I guess. He had one on lap 30 something. He was like battling in the midfield at a point where most of the drivers have already pitted and he hasn't. He said,
"Mate, think about pulling me out of this shit."
And then when he was battling Franco,
"Yeah, fucking very intelligent, that move. Jesus Christ."
And just like his tone was very sassy today. Hopefully the rest of the season goes better for him, because once again, I want to see him succeed, but also that would obviously help McLaren with their Constructors' Championship and also Lando with his Drivers' Championship. Some other things worth noting is that Alonso retired for brake issues. I mean, what can you say? It's a shame, obviously, 400th race, and that's how it ends. Not very fun. Haas got double points, which is great. Very proud of them. And before I talk about the championships, I just wanted to give some props to Lando. He was handling everything that happened like a champ today. He stayed calm and he was patient. And I think he had like a little shift in his perspective about the whole situation in the 3-week break we had before Austin. He seemed much more relaxed, I would say, about the whole thing. So I'm proud of him for just not losing his shit, because it paid off at the end. Obviously, if he wasn't held up by Max at the start, he might have gone for the win, but it's like this. So in terms of the Drivers' Championship, Lando obviously finished quite a bit ahead of Max, so closes the gap just a little bit, but just enough to give me hope again. We do need to be careful of Charles in the drivers. He's only 24 points behind. So it was also a great thing that we finished ahead of him today. But the competition is alive. In the constructors, big move. Ferrari's overtaken Red Bull for second place. And the battle between them and McLaren is on. And I am so conflicted. I don't know what to feel. I need to decide if I'm more of a McLaren fan or more Ferrari. I think I'm more of a McLaren fan, but it would be so iconic if Ferrari pulled this off. God, I don't know. Like, I do know I need it to be McLaren, but like, I won't be mad if it's gonna be Ferrari, you know? Whatever. I am stressed about that. And about Red Bull, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but is there any chance that Red Bull have given up on the constructors to have more wind tunnel time at the end of the season? Because if you didn't know, the higher you finish in the championship, the less time you have in a wind tunnel in the off season, which is obviously huge for developing your car. And obviously Red Bull are not that pleased with the car they have, so more tunnel time will be definitely helpful. So do you think they're just doing it on purpose? I don't know. But in terms of the Drivers' Championship, I don't think they've given up on that at all. I just don't think they're as passionate about that as Max is, because Max is very determined to keep his title and win his fourth. And I am kind of scared of that. Especially because in his post-race interview, he was asked if he will act differently from now on in relation to the penalties to avoid getting them. And he said that he will have a drink in the pit stop because the penalties are so long, so he'll have time. And I know it's like those interviews are being made in the heat of the moment. Maybe he was joking or it was just the adrenaline, but it implies that he's not going to change his behavior, even if that means that he gets more penalties. This is basically a threat for Max, I think, to crash into Lando in the remainder of the season, because technically he can just crash into Lando and win that way. I just wonder if he thinks Charles is a threat as well as Lando. But either way, yeah, I'm looking forward to next week in Brazil, which is a sprint weekend, so more action. But I'm also scared to death. And I'm pretty sure that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Enjoy these memes. Bye!
Recovered from that oversteer. I had an oversteer from the other side, and then I was like, fuck. But luckily, sorry, oh no. Oh no, I don't want to join Max.
Yeah, you're winning here.